I thought the worst part of driving alone through the middle of nowhere would be falling asleep at the wheel. Empty roads, endless darkness, no towns for miles. But that night, the road wasn't what almost killed me. It was the moment I looked in my rearview mirror and realized I hadn't been alone in my car the entire time. This happened last year during a solo road trip I took from Wisconsin to Montana. If you've ever driven through that part of the country, you know how empty it is. For the first hour and the last hour, there are towns, lights, traffic, but everything in between feels like another world. Miles of nothing. Forests that swallow the road. Open fields that stretch into complete darkness. Once you go far enough west, you start seeing small mountains rising up in the distance, black shapes against the night sky. Because of how I planned the trip, I decided to do most of the drive overnight and push through into the next day. I didn't want to split it into 2 full days and pay for another hotel. I knew it would be exhausting, but I figured I could handle it. I left at 7 p.m. Before pulling out, I double-checked everything in my car. My bag was in the back. Snacks and drinks were on the passenger seat. Phone charged. GPS ready. I told myself I was being overly cautious, but something about driving alone through that much empty land at night made me uneasy from the start. The first hour was easy. City lights, small towns, other cars on the road. It felt normal. Then the road opened up. Traffic thinned out until I was sometimes the only set of headlights on the highway. The towns disappeared, the streetlights vanished. Just long, dark stretches of road broken up by the occasional gas station every 15 or 20 miles. After about an hour or two, I checked my fuel gauge. I still had plenty of gas, but the stations were getting farther apart. I didn't like the idea of pushing my luck in the middle of nowhere, so when I finally saw a gas station sign, I decided to stop and top off my tank before the really rural stretch. It took almost 20 minutes before I actually reached it. The station was tiny. 4 pumps, no cars. The convenience store was closed and dark, like the place had been abandoned for the night. The only light came from the fluorescent bulbs over the pumps, buzzing faintly in the rain. I pulled in and parked at one of the pumps. The gas started flowing painfully slow. It took almost a full minute just to pump a single gallon. I leaned against my car, staring out at the empty road, listening to the soft hum of the pump and the distant sound of wind moving through the fields. That's when I saw headlights. A car came down the road, moving way too slowly for the speed limit. It passed the gas station, then suddenly braked and reversed back toward the entrance. That alone made my stomach tighten. Reversing on a dark, empty highway in the middle of the night felt reckless. The car pulled into the station and parked at the pump directly behind mine. I didn't look back right away. I heard the driver's door open, footsteps on gravel, but instead of the sound of a pump being lifted, there was nothing. Just silence. After about a minute of that uncomfortable stillness, I glanced over my shoulder. The man standing there wasn't doing anything. He was tall, wearing a gray flannel and black jeans, and he was just staring at me. Not glancing, not distracted. Locked onto me. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. I gave a small, awkward smile and nodded, then turned back toward my own pump. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched. A few seconds passed, then 10. Finally, I heard the sound of metal as he picked up the pump and started fueling his car. I felt a strange wave of relief, like I'd imagined the tension. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe I was being paranoid. When my tank was full, I put the pump back and closed my gas cap. As I turned, I caught him looking at me again. His eyes looked heavy, dull, like someone who hadn't slept in days but was wired on caffeine or something stronger. I got into my car and pulled back onto the road, telling myself to shake it off. Weird guy. That was it. The rain started a few hours later. By then, I'd been driving for about 5 hours. It was past midnight. The rain made the darkness feel heavier, like the road was shrinking into a narrow tunnel of headlights and wet asphalt. I cracked open an energy drink, tried snacking, but nothing helped the exhaustion creeping into my bones. By around 1 a.m., I knew I needed a break. My fuel was getting low again too. I drove until I spotted another gas station sign glowing faintly through the rain. This one looked even more run down than the first. The building was old, the paint peeling, but the lights were still on. The place was empty. No cars, no people, just rain and buzzing fluorescent bulbs. I filled up my tank, then parked in a spot beside the building. I checked the weather on my phone. The rain wasn't stopping anytime soon. I checked nearby towns. There were none. According to the map, I was sitting in the middle of nowhere. I decided to take a short nap. Just 30 minutes. Enough to reset my brain and get back on the road safely. I leaned my seat back and closed my eyes. Rain hammered against the roof of my car as I drifted in and out of shallow sleep. The sound was almost hypnotic, a constant white noise that blurred the line between being awake and dreaming. When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was how dark it still was. The rain hadn't stopped. If anything, it sounded heavier, louder against the metal roof. I glanced at my phone. My alarm hadn't gone off yet. Only about 25 minutes had passed. I sat up, stretching my stiff neck, and looked through the windshield. The gas station was still empty. The lights buzzed overhead. The building stood there like a hollow shell, rainwater dripping from the edges of the roof. Then I noticed a car at one of the pumps. My stomach dropped. I leaned forward, squinting through the rain-streaked glass. Even through the distortion of water and darkness, I recognized the shape, the color, the position. It was the same car from the first gas station, the same one that had backed up off the highway, the same one that had parked behind me. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Rural areas don't have many cars. Maybe someone else just happened to be driving a similar vehicle. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. What made it worse was that I couldn't see the man anywhere. The car was there, parked neatly at the pump, but there was no movement inside. No silhouette behind the windshield, no figure outside near the pump. The entire place was empty, except for that car. My pulse started to pound in my ears. Where was he? There was nowhere else for him to be. The convenience store was closed. The restrooms were locked. There were no other buildings, just the pumps, the small building, and miles of open land beyond the faint glow of the lights. A heavy, instinctive dread settled into my chest. Something was wrong. I didn't let myself think it through. I reached for the key, started the engine, and shifted into reverse. I just wanted to put distance between myself and that place as fast as possible. As I began backing out of the parking spot, I glanced into my rear-view mirror, and that's when my blood went cold. He wasn't behind my car. He was inside it, sitting in my back seat. His face was barely visible in the darkness, but I could see his eyes clearly. They reflected the faint light from the station, wide and unblinking, locked directly onto mine in the mirror. For a split second, my brain refused to accept what I was seeing. It felt unreal, like my mind was playing a cruel trick on me after too many hours without real sleep. Then he leaned forward slightly. I screamed. My body moved before my thoughts could catch up. I slammed the car into park, kicked the door open, and stumbled out into the rain. My shoes slipped on the wet pavement as I fell to my knees, then scrambled back up and ran. I didn't hear the man get out of the car. Behind me, my car continued to roll backward slowly, still in reverse. I ran toward the edge of the lot, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I ducked behind the dark outline of trees at the edge of the station and turned back, my breath ragged, rain soaking through my clothes. My car rolled for another few seconds, then stopped. The engine revved, and then the headlight swung as he turned the wheel and drove away. Just like that, my car disappeared down the dark, empty highway, swallowed by rain and blackness. I stood there in shock, my body trembling violently. The rain soaked me to the skin, but I barely felt the cold. My thoughts lagged behind the reality of what had just happened. Then it hit me. My phone was still inside the car. I stared down the road, my chest tight with panic. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, at an empty gas station in the middle of the night, during a storm. That's when I noticed something else. The man had left his own car behind. It was still sitting at the pump. Slowly, cautiously, I walked back toward it. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. I expected the car to suddenly start, or for the man to appear from the shadows again. But nothing happened. The driver's door was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. There were grocery bags on the back seat, fast food wrappers, a half-empty bottle of water in the cup holder, and on the floor near the passenger seat, my phone. Relief crashed over me so hard my knees almost buckled. I grabbed it with shaking hands. The screen was locked, but I could still dial emergency services from the lock screen. I called 911 immediately. At the time, I thought the man was just careless, stupid, that he'd panicked and fled, leaving everything behind. But later, after speaking with investigators, I learned the truth. That car wasn't his. It had been stolen. Everything inside it belonged to someone else, another person he had done this to before me, someone who hadn't been as lucky. The police believed he hadn't climbed into my back seat by accident. He had been waiting there, hiding in the dark, planning to reveal himself once I was back on the road. Why he wanted me hostage, where he planned to take me, no one knows. He was never found, and neither was my car. I stood there in the rain for a long time after the police took over, shaking, soaked to the skin, staring at the empty road where my car disappeared. They eventually drove me to the nearest town, a tiny place with one diner still open and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. I sat there for hours, wrapped in a blanket, answering the same questions over and over again. Every time headlights passed by the window, my chest tightened. Every time I heard footsteps, I flinched. I didn't sleep that night, not in the cheap motel they put me in, not on the hard bed with the door locked and a chair jammed under the handle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him in my back seat. The way his eyes looked at me in the mirror, the way he didn't move, the way he waited. For weeks after that, I couldn't drive without checking my back seat first, then checking again and again. I stopped taking long road trips, stopped driving at night. If I had to travel, I made sure I wasn't alone. If I couldn't avoid being alone, I didn't go. Because once you realize how easy it is for someone to sit right behind you, in the dark, while you're focused on the road, you never feel truly alone in your car again. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm half asleep, I still swear I hear breathing behind me. Next story. I thought the knock on my door that night was just bad timing, the kind of bad timing you laugh about later. But when I opened the door and found a man standing inches from my face in the freezing dark, his mouth covered, his eyes empty, I realized something was already very wrong. Because I don't think he came to knock. I think he came to see if anyone was home. This happened last year, in the middle of January. I live in a small, quiet house in a wooded town about 45 minutes outside the city. The kind of place where the roads go dark early, the trees crowd the driveways, and you don't really get unexpected visitors. Everyone knows everyone. Strangers stand out. That night, I only worked a half day. It was one of those rare evenings where nothing was planned, no obligations, no stress. Just me, my house, and the quiet. Around 7, my phone rang. A friend of mine had car trouble and needed a ride home from work. Maybe grab food on the way, he said. It wasn't the first time. I told him I'd be there in a few minutes. I grabbed my jacket from the front closet, slipped my keys into my pocket, and reached for the door. The moment I opened it, my entire body jolted. There was a man standing on my porch, not at the end of the steps, not near the railing, right in front of the door. So close that if I had taken one more step forward, I would have bumped into him. He was tall, wrapped in a heavy winter coat, with a black gaiter pulled up over the lower half of his face. Only his eyes were visible, dark, still, watching me. He didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't seem startled that the door had opened in his face. For half a second, I felt stupid for jumping like that. Then the reality of the situation hit me. Why was there a stranger standing inches from my front door in the middle of winter? In the middle of nowhere? Before I could say anything, he spoke first. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Sorry," he said. "I was just about to knock." I forced out an awkward laugh and asked if he needed something. He hesitated, like he hadn't expected me to respond. Then he asked if I was someone else, a name I didn't recognize. David, Daryl, something close to that. I told him no. He nodded slowly, said, "Okay," and turned around. I stepped out onto the porch, locking the door behind me, and watched him walk down my long driveway toward the road. I didn't get in my car until he disappeared into the darkness beyond the trees. The entire drive to my friend's work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. In my town, people don't just wander up to houses by accident. The driveways are long, the properties are spaced out. If you're on someone's porch, you usually know exactly why you're there. But I brushed it off. Maybe he really had the wrong house. I picked up my friend, we grabbed food, I dropped him off. By the time I headed home, it was around 9. Light snow drifted through the air, quiet and soft. Everything looked normal again. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was dark and still. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and tried to forget about the whole thing. I warmed up, turned on the TV, and let the night pass. Hours went by. I didn't even check the time. No work the next morning meant no reason to care. Eventually, I stood up, stretched, and turned the TV off. I was halfway to the stairs when I remembered the man on my porch. The thought came out of nowhere. I walked back to the front door and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty. The road was empty. Snow drifted down slowly, peaceful and undisturbed. Then I noticed something else, movement across my driveway. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. The porch light didn't reach far enough. I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to look outside. There were footprints in the fresh snow, shoe prints leading from the road, up my driveway, toward my car. Then they veered off into the yard. into the trees. A cold weight settled in my chest. If the man from earlier had come back, that meant he hadn't gone to the wrong house at all. I closed the door slowly, quietly, as if whoever had left those footprints might still be close enough to hear it. The lock clicked into place. The sound felt too loud. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain of my front door, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Footprints didn't automatically mean danger. Maybe it was some drunk neighbor cutting through my yard. Maybe it was a hunter. Maybe it was just coincidence. But my body didn't believe any of that. My heart was beating too fast. The house suddenly felt smaller, thinner, like the walls were no longer keeping anything out. I walked from window to window, peering out into the darkness. The snow reflected the faint glow from my porch light, but beyond that, the woods were just a black wall. Every tree trunk looked like a person standing still. Every branch looked like a raised arm. That's when I started to hear it. At first, it was so faint I thought it was in my head. A soft, irregular sound. Not the wind, not the trees. Something dull and rhythmic. I stopped moving, listened. Nothing. I shook my head, feeling embarrassed at myself. This is what happens when you let your imagination spiral. I told myself to calm down, to stop scanning every shadow like a paranoid mess. Then it happened. A violent thud slammed into the back of my house. The sound exploded through the hallway. The walls seemed to shudder. My phone nearly slipped out of my hand as my entire body jerked in response. There was no mistaking that sound. That wasn't weather. That wasn't an animal. That was someone hitting my house. I backed away from the front door, my pulse roaring in my ears. Another impact hit the back of the house, heavier than the first. Whatever was back there wasn't testing the door. They were trying to break it. I rushed down the hallway, my footsteps echoing too loudly in my own ears. The operator picked up as I hit 911, my voice already shaking as I whispered my address and tried to explain what was happening. As I spoke, I caught a glimpse of movement through the frosted glass of the back door. Just a shadow, a blur, something shifting on the other side. Another thud. The doorframe creaked. The operator told me to get somewhere safe, lock myself in, find an exit if I could. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed my keys off the counter, turned, and ran for the front door. The thought of running into the open terrified me, but staying inside felt worse. Whatever was at the back door was determined to get in. I flung the door open and sprinted across the porch, my boots slipping on the thin layer of snow. My lungs burned as I tore down the steps toward my car. I half expected to see someone waiting by it. Another silhouette. Another pair of eyes in the dark. There was no one. I yanked the door open, threw myself into the driver's seat, and locked the doors with shaking hands. The engine coughed to life as I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching through the snow. Only when I was halfway down the road did I let myself look back. The house was still dark, still quiet. From the outside, it looked peaceful, normal, like nothing violent had just tried to force its way inside. The police arrived not long after. By the time they got there, the back door had been beaten open. The frame was splintered. Wet footprints tracked across my kitchen floor, leading partway into the house before disappearing. Whoever had tried to get inside had already been inside my yard, and they had left in a hurry. The only description I could give was the man from earlier that night. The one on my porch. The one who asked for someone else by name. The officers couldn't tell me if it was the same person, but I could tell by the way they looked at the damage that whoever did this wasn't just knocking to see if someone was home. I didn't go back to that house that night. The police told me it was probably safe once they cleared the rooms, but those words meant nothing to me. Safe didn't exist anymore. Not in that place. Not after seeing the broken door frame, the wet footprints on my floor, the proof that someone had been inside my space without my permission. I drove to my friend's place and sat in his driveway for a long time before I even had the nerve to get out of the car. My hands were still trembling. Every passing set of headlights made my stomach drop. Every sound felt too loud. When I finally lay down on his couch, sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the back door bending inward. I heard that thud again. I imagined the moment it would have given way completely. I imagined what would have happened if I hadn't checked the door. If I had just gone upstairs and fallen asleep like I planned to. The thought made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. The next morning I went back to my house with daylight and 2 friends with me. The place looked different in the sun. Smaller, less threatening, like it was trying to pretend nothing had happened. But the damage was still there. The splintered wood, the marks on the floor, the feeling in my gut that something had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I changed the locks that day. I added extra bolts to the doors. I installed motion lights around the yard. I even bought cheap security cameras, even though I didn't really trust them to protect me. None of it made me feel better. That night, I lay in my bed with every light in the house turned on. I checked the doors 3 times before I could even get under the blanket. I left the TV playing quietly just so the silence wouldn't swallow me whole. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time the house creaked, my eyes snapped open. Every gust of wind made my muscles tense. I kept expecting another impact against the door, another shadow against the window, another figure standing just outside the glow of the porch light. Over the next few weeks, it didn't get better. I started jumping at normal sounds, the heater kicking on, the fridge humming, branches brushing the siding. I caught myself standing at windows for long stretches of time, staring out into the trees, trying to convince myself there was nothing there, but part of me never believed it. I stopped going out at night unless I absolutely had to. I parked closer to the house. I carried my keys between my fingers when I walked up the driveway. I learned every sound my house made, every little noise, so I could tell when something was wrong. And still, sometimes I felt watched. The police never found anyone. No suspects, no leads, no answers. The footprints in the snow were gone within days. The woods swallowed whatever path that person had taken. Whoever it was knew the area, knew how to move through it without being seen. I moved out of that house less than 6 months later. People told me I was overreacting, that nothing actually happened, that no one got hurt. They were wrong. Something did happen. Someone stood outside my home that night. Someone came back later, armed with something heavy enough to break a door. Someone tried to get inside while I was alone. And the scariest part isn't that they failed. It's that they tried at all. Because somewhere out there, in the woods beyond my old house, there's a person who now knows exactly how my door sounded when it started to break. And I don't think people like that just stop trying. Next story. I thought babysitting would be the safest job I could have in college. Quiet house, sleeping child, easy money. But that night, someone was already watching the house, waiting for the parents to leave. And when he finally showed himself, he wasn't there for me. He was there for the child. This happened back in 2019, during my sophomore year of college. At the time, I was babysitting 3 or 4 nights a week to help pay off my car. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy money. Most families just needed someone to be there while their kids slept. For about a month, I'd been babysitting the same 3-year-old boy once a week. His parents were quiet, soft-spoken people, but always polite and friendly. They usually left around the child's bedtime, so my job was simple. Make sure he stayed asleep and make sure nothing went wrong while they were gone. Most nights, I'd just sit on my phone for 4 or 5 hours until they came back. That night, I pulled into their driveway around 8 p.m. They greeted me, mentioned their son was already asleep in his room, thanked me, and left shortly after. I never really asked what they did every week so late at night. I assumed it was some kind of date night or trip into the city. Once they were gone, I did my usual walkthrough of the house. Everything looked normal. Doors locked, windows closed, quiet. I put my bag down in the living room and sat in the chair, scrolling on my phone, occasionally glancing toward the hallway that led to the kids' room. Not even an hour later, my phone rang. It was the mother. I answered, confused, and she immediately asked, "Did you just try to call me?" I told her no. I hadn't touched my phone. I'd been sitting in the living room the whole time. She explained that she'd received a call from an unknown number, but when she answered, nobody spoke. She thought maybe I'd gotten a new phone or something had gone wrong with the connection. I reassured her everything was fine in the house. The kid was still asleep. She said okay and hung up. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal, just a weird phone glitch. Concerned parent nerves. I checked on the kid again, saw him sleeping peacefully, and went back to the living room. About 20 minutes later, headlights swept across the front windows. The light slipped through the cracks in the blinds. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor pulling into their driveway, but the lights didn't turn off. After a minute, I stood up and carefully peeked through the blinds. There was an old dark gray sedan parked directly in front of the house, right along the curb. The car looked worn down, rust along the edges, and the windows were heavily tinted, almost blacked out. What caught my attention next made my stomach tighten. A man was standing near the end of the driveway, just a few feet from the sidewalk, staring up at the house. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't moving, just standing there, looking. I didn't want to confront him. This wasn't even my house. I didn't know if he was a neighbor or someone who'd gotten the wrong address. So I stayed still and watched from behind the blinds. After a minute, he walked back to the car and got in. The sedan pulled away slowly, creeping down the road like the driver was still watching the house in the mirrors. Then the headlights stopped. Far down the road, between the trees, the lights went dark, as if the car had parked again. I waited by the window for several minutes. The man never came back toward the house. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he was looking for a friend's house and got confused. I considered texting the parents, but I didn't want to scare them over what might have been nothing. So I went back to the living room. I turned the TV on low volume so I wouldn't wake the child. Minutes turned into an hour, then almost 2. The house stayed quiet. My eyes started to feel heavy. I wasn't fully asleep, but I wasn't fully awake either. That half-dreaming state where everything feels slow and fuzzy. Then I heard it. A light thump. I barely registered it at first. Then I heard it again. This time, it snapped me awake. I stood up, suddenly alert. At first, I thought it might have been something falling inside the house. I decided to check on the child. As I walked down the hallway toward the stairs, I heard another sound, a dull, metallic tug. I glanced toward the back door. That's when I saw him. A man stood outside, gripping the handle of the back door, yanking on it. Our eyes met. For half a second, we just stared at each other. Then his expression changed. The moment he realized I was inside, watching him, he started pulling harder, violently, trying to force the door open. Adrenaline slammed into me. I sprinted up the stairs and grabbed the child from his bed, holding him tight and trying not to scream. The thuds against the back door grew louder. It sounded like he was using something to pry it open. With the child in my arms, I rushed back down the stairs. Then I heard a loud crack, plastic and metal snapping. The back door burst open. The man rushed inside. I only saw him for a second. Casual clothes, dark hair. And then I saw the knife in his hand. He ran toward me. I bolted out the front door, jumped into my car, and slammed it into reverse. As I sped backward, he reached my window. I drove until I was far away, called 911, and called the parents. By the time police arrived, he was gone. To this day, I believe he planned to threaten me, or worse, to take the child. What still haunts me is how he knew the parents would be gone. After that night, the parents stopped speaking to me. They thanked me once, and then disappeared from my life. Years later, I found out the mother had been married before, to a man who looked disturbingly similar to the one I saw. I'll probably never know the truth, but I know one thing for sure. That man wasn't there for me. He was there for the child.